This is Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur with your host, Lynn Freest. Lynn will share ideas and expert advice from people that are walking in your shoes and living their encore careers, where they want and at the pace they want. You'll start a company of one with confidence and knowledge to live a fulfilled life of freedom and ease. Lynn is a coach and leadership consultant whose mission is to show senior leaders and experts how to start something refreshing and new after a full career in the corporate environment.
Welcome to this episode of the podcast, Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur. Thanks for listening. This is episode 160, and it's How to Learn Better and Faster, and it's a conversation with Mark Herschberg. With an encore career, the rewards are great. You can work when you want, where you want, and you can do the work you love. So to get off to a powerful start, please contact me. Today, we're having a wonderful conversation with Mark Herschberg. He's the author of the Career Toolkit book, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. And he's also the founder and creator of the Brain Bump app. Well, Mark has spent his career launching and developing new ventures at startups and Fortune 500s and also working in academia. And he helped start MIT's Career Success Accelerator, and he teaches that annually. He has a wonderful background at MIT, received a BS in physics, electrical engineering, computer science, a master's in engineering in electrical and computer science, and he has a focus on cryptography. And adding to that, he's the founder of the Brain Bump app. And the Brain Bump app is basically, have you ever read a business book or self-help book or listened to a podcast and really can't remember what happened later on? And what if there was an easy way to recycle the key teachings that were in that app so that you could bring them back into conscious memory again? That's kind of what it's all about, and we'll talk about that later in the episode. So to start off, we'll be talking about Mark's journey, how his work helping people begin their careers also applies to some of the things we're doing for an encore career, how he approaches learning, and his founding of the Brain Bump app. Well, welcome, Mark. I'm really appreciative of you sharing your time and knowledge with us today. And I'd like to just start off and have you go ahead and do your own introduction and maybe then follow up with some of your journey, which I believe is very interesting.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show today. Now, I have a very interesting dual career. I graduated from MIT back in the 90s with a bunch of science and engineering degrees and began as a software engineer in the dot-com era. Early on, I realized I wanted to become a CTO, a Chief Technology Officer. And what I realized was that it wasn't just about saying, I'm a really good engineer. Yeah, that helped. But there were other skills that I would need. Leadership, networking, hiring, team building. No one ever taught me these skills. So I had to go and learn them on my own. And I began to develop them in myself and quickly realized they're not just for senior leaders or not just for executives. They are for everyone. And I began to upskill my team. Now, I continued on and I have been a CTO at traditional startups, at Fortune 500s. These days, I've got a couple startups I'm building. I also have a fractional CTO consulting business that I have. But in parallel, as I was training up my team 20 plus years ago, MIT had come upon a similar conclusion. They found these are the skills companies want. Again, leadership, communication, networking, negotiating, but we're not teaching them to people. So we wanted to instill those skills in our students. And when I heard that they were developing this, I said, I've got some content. I'm happy to give it to you. I thought it'd be, that's it, one and done, quick conversation. But instead, they asked me to develop some more content for them and then to help teach. And suddenly, I found myself teaching at MIT, which I've now been doing for over 2 decades. So in parallel to my career building tech companies, I've also been teaching at MIT and elsewhere for 2 decades, and then turned that into the book, the Career Toolkit, and the speaking and other things I do with that. So I've got 1 foot building companies and 1 foot teaching.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Mark, because I think one of your focuses was on the crypto or the security, cybersecurity kind of stuff. And that's a kind of an interesting specialty in itself.
Yeah, my graduate work was in cybersecurity, was in cryptography specifically. And of course, we know that's become just a bigger and bigger issue over the years. So more and more demand.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, and I'm curious, you made these transitions. Anything that, as you said, hey, I'm going to have startups. What were some of the things that you learned or that you noticed or that you experienced as you were saying, hey, I'm going from a CTO to doing startups?
There's a number of things to keep in mind. Now, first, I've probably been ahead of the curve in terms of dynamically changing jobs. My father was probably ahead of the curve for his generation. He changed jobs every 5-6 years, which for his generation was fairly rapid because he was always keeping an eye out. Is there a better opportunity? And we all need to do that. I learned this early in my very first job out of school. I had a great boss, is a great company. And then one day my boss comes to me and says, this may come as a surprise to you, or maybe not, but today's my last day. I'm leaving. I'm going to go start a new company. Hey, you should come with me. Now, I could go to his company. I could stay at my current one, but I was blindsided by the fact that this company was splitting in two. I shouldn't have been because I knew there were a bunch of meetings going on and there were some other people who turned out to be lawyers. And there was something happening, but I just said, oh, I don't need to be worried about. Now, that was okay, but imagine if he said, oh, this might be a surprise for you, but we're laying off half the company. Thanks for your time. So you always have to be looking out. Even when I was at startup companies, sometimes what was good for the startup, and that might be a sale, that might be a pivot to a new, better opportunity, what's right for the company may not have been right for me. And so it's very important that we have our plan, our career plan, where we're trying to go, and we constantly reevaluate and say, am I on plan? This new direction we're going in, the new project that someone wants me on, is that right for me? Certainly it's right for the company, but what about for me? And if it's not, it's time to go. It's nothing personal, but I don't want to go in that direction. And you have to be proactive. Too many people, they're like a ship just adrift on the ocean. They just go where the currents take them. And then they find they didn't land where they expected. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, and certainly in today's world, we always say this is the most volatile ever, but it's probably the least volatile it'll ever be again. It's just one of those things where that's how life is these days.
Exactly. And we need to be proactive in navigating. We need to recognize that there are forces acting upon us, some that will help, some that will hurt. But it's like the economy. I can't tell you, are we going to be in a recession, a boom time, how long or when? What I can do is make wise financial decisions. What are my savings goals? And at sometimes, hey, I'm doing great. The market's up and I'm way ahead of them and I'll put some more money aside. Or sometimes I'm behind. I say, maybe I'll cut back or maybe I will take a different job that makes more money. But I need to be proactive because I can't control the economy. I can't control my company, but I can control my choices in my career.
Right. Absolutely. I was thinking, I know you've written a book. Even that was something different, I'm sure, when you first got started there. And again, for the audience that we're talking to, that might be something they're interested in. Any insights that you had as you launched yourself into writing this book?
A whole bunch. Now, I didn't plan to write a book. And this might be surprising because I'm the guy saying, have a career plan and think about what you're going to do and try to get there. But one of the key things in your plan, it's flexible. It's not set in stone. You can and should adjust. I didn't plan to teach at MIT, but when I had that, what I thought was a one-off meeting, and they said, hey, by the way, do you want to help design more content? Oh, and now do you want to help teach? Each time I was given an option. And I could have said no. I didn't have that. But I said, wait, here's a new opportunity. Let me see, does this fit into my plan? In fact, do I want to change my plan to incorporate it? Of course, teaching at MIT, yes, please. The book was intended to be about 20 pages of notes originally for my students. And 20 pages became 40, became 80, and just grew. And I expanded so it's not just targeted at students, they're really universal skills. And at that point, said, oh, I guess I have a book, and turned it into a book. Now, when I went to do that, I've never written a book before. I wanted to understand it. So first thing I did, I went to a friend of mine. She's been a best-selling author for many years. I said, hi, I need some advice because I know other people have expertise. That's why you're listening to this podcast. Someone's been down that path before. And she gave me some starting advice. I then went out, I read about 1,500 articles on every aspect of doing a book. And here's the thing, doing a book, people think, oh, yeah, you write, you get some editing, done. Yes, you do that. That's like when you start a business and say, hey, I built a business or I created a product. Now I'll just wait for people to come knock on my door. Ain't going to happen. You need to put in as much time marketing and selling your book as in writing, often more. Likewise, when you are a consultant, when you start a new startup company, yeah, there's a lot of hard work. What is it that you are creating? What is the service you're offering? But you're going to put in a tremendous amount of work on that marketing and sales. And that's what most people don't think about. They think about the building, not the selling. And so I spend all this time, I research these articles. I actually have a collection about the 200 most useful. We can give you the link later for anyone thinking of doing a book. And then it's been, I can tell you I don't know how much time I spent writing, but I've been on over 300 podcasts to promote it, as well as other things, other media appearances and other stuff I've done. So it is a marathon when you launch any new venture, whether it's a book, a startup, or just your own consultancy.
Yeah, and that's, I think, important, again, for our audience here is that if they've been in corporate work, they haven't had to worry about many of these things. Unless they were in marketing, took care of itself, the finance took care of itself. But now all of a sudden, if they're considering leaving the corporate world and going out on their own, all of a sudden, these are now part of your job. And it's just something you always have to be prepared to do.
And everything, as you know, it falls to you. If there's issue collecting money from a client, you can't just say to the finance department, hey, go figure it out. Nope, that's on you. If there's a problem where your website isn't working, you are the IT department. Everything falls to you. Now, yes, you can find experts. You can find someone to do your website, someone to do your social media marketing. You can find people to do it. But the reality is you need to be on top of them. You don't have to do it all yourself, but you have to check in. Okay, why did my website go down? How do we make sure it's not happening again? Are there other things that might take it down? The social media campaigns you're doing, why did you choose to do it this way? What are some of the other ways you didn't want to do? What's the thinking behind it? What's a good metric we should be hitting? I better get that metric from someone else because you might be biased and you're saying, no, we're doing fine. I better go find what should we be doing and are we hitting it? And are you doing a good job at a reasonable cost? So even when you outsource it to someone else, there's still a lot of work for you to do managing them.
And when I've talked with people, a lot of what I say is that you have to at least have an awareness of many of these skills, even if in the end, they're probably somebody else is better at them than you are, because you still, again, have to have some grasp of what's going on out there. And like you say, you still have to provide oversight.
I can run engineering teams, product teams, a number of teams. I'm not the guy to run a finance team. Why? Yeah, I can manage people, but I don't really know the details of how to do payment collection. I don't know the details of how to do cash flow management. So if I was supervising people doing it, they could probably pull the wool over my eyes. I'm not that in the weeds with it. Whereas in other spaces, I know enough I can ask the right questions. And so you need to think about for each of these, because now it's all on you, you have to be able to ask the right questions. And now one thing you can do, of course, is you don't have to do this alone. I don't just mean get those outsourced people. Yes, do that. But have that peer group, have other people who are doing a similar business. I don't mean necessarily your competitors are doing the exact same thing. If you're doing your own accountancy firm, find someone who's doing a small law firm and someone with a small IT firm, because you're all going to have similar issues of, hey, what are you doing for social media marketing? What are you doing to manage your payroll system? How do you think about whether it makes sense to spend $4,000 to go to a conference that's now out of my pocket? So you can have other people who can give you their thinking, their feedback, sharing what's working and not for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I know in your book, you have a whole section on networking, and I think that's always an interesting piece, because as people leave the corporate world, all of a sudden, the network you had may not be useful for what you need to do next. And I think you have some great insights on that.
It makes sense to look around your community. And community could be physical. It could be people in your town or your city, but could also be an online community of other people in the same space. Build those new relationships, whether it's joining an online forum, finding a local meetup group, going to groups like SCORE, Service Corps of Retired Executives, or the Chamber of Commerce, or these other resources that have other small business owners and really building new relationship there. Of course, don't just discard your old relationships. Yes, you might have spent 10 years in the same corporate trench with this other person. But did you know before she did that, she actually ran her own business? Mm-hmm. A friend of mine, she was head of our marketing team. Before she did that, many years ago, before she got into marketing, she ran a restaurant. She ran a publishing company. Now, I happen to find out I never knew that about her before we have this conversation. So you never know what prior experience someone has, or they might have moved on, or even if not them, maybe it's someone they know. Maybe her husband did exactly what you're doing, or his friend from college, his former roommate is doing something similar, and he can connect you to that guy. So remember, your network is not just people, but the people they know.
Yeah, absolutely. When I've done some volunteer work helping people that want to start companies and stuff like that, we always encourage them as they go out and do their customer discovery. The last question you always ask is, who else should I talk to? Because it can be gold.
You are absolutely right. That is one of the most valuable questions. But I, even before that, would ask, is there anything I can do to help you? Oh, and sure. People often forget. They think, well, I need something. I'm coming to you because I have a need, because here I am. I'm at square one. I've got nothing right now. I've got my cocktail napkin idea, but there are things you can offer. And I tell this to my students who think, I haven't even graduated college. What do I have to offer? There are things they have to offer. So certainly the listeners here who have decades of experience have a lot to offer, and you don't know until you find out what the other person needs. So always make these a two-way street.
Absolutely. And that, again, is another point that I try to emphasize, saying you have to really discover what your future client's problems are, not what your former position title was, because now you're trying to solve someone else's problem, not fill a role that was designed or that you held in the corporate world.
That's very well said. And in fact, I can tell you about a third of the jobs I've had did not exist. It's not there was a job post and I applied, or someone said, hey, my buddy's hiring. I met someone who wasn't necessarily looking for me, but when I met this person, I would do that exploration. Now, sometimes it was formal, and sometimes it wouldn't even go anywhere. But other times, as you're talking, I hear, wait, you have a problem. Tell me more about this problem. Oh, so are you trying to fix it this way or that way, or how important is it to you? And when you hear you have a problem and I know how to solve it, that is basically how you get your first job. That's how you talk them into it, whether they're hiring you as an employee, hiring you as a consultant. A lot of people, especially if it's a domain they don't understand. So think about in 2002, for example, someone saying, yeah, we've got a website and I guess people can go to it, but I wish there was something more they could do with it. And someone might say, have you thought about selling your products directly? Wait, you can do that? Yes, you can. And I'm an e-commerce expert and I can help you do that. I had no idea you could sell things online. So you have more expertise in some area. We sometimes forget that because people we hang around with are also experts. Listen to the problems of the other people and help explore, and then see if you know how to solve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I often have thought that as leaving the corporate world, we do have to own our expertise. It is valuable. We may not even realize how valuable it is. But on the other hand, we have to be curious. We have to remain curious as to how do we find out more about what other people are needing and doing, but then don't be shy about the fact, yeah, we do know how to do some things. If nothing else, after years, we've seen things go wrong a lot of times. And so we know how to recover from mistakes. And sometimes people with less experience, that's the piece they really need is, hey, how do I recover from this disaster we got in front of us here?
Exactly. Or you're about to hit some problems. Now, they might not believe you, but you can help say, when you see this, be prepared. And then when they see that coming, and I see the iceberg 20 feet away, they go, wait a second, you really helped me. Hey, what other icebergs can you help me avoid? Or after they hit the iceberg, they say, you know what? I hit one. Let me not hit the next one. So maybe you could come in and help me there.
Well, yeah. And I think just in general, my peer groups, the people with experience, we're trying to engage a lot more diverse people in the workforce in different ways, and people that maybe don't have a lot of background in, whether it be manufacturing or whatever it may be. So I think people with my age group or even younger people, we can provide some talent development for people who are brand new, who will be great people, but they haven't had that shared set of experiences yet.
And even just the more general wisdom. Now, as we're recording, it's the summer of 2022, and we're watching, for example, cryptocurrencies collapse. And to the 23-year-olds, oh my God, how is this happening? It's not supposed to happen. But those of us who have been around, we've seen bubbles before. We know what bubbles will do. Or if you know your history, you've seen the tulip bulbs, you've seen other manias, and you can look and say, yeah, we've seen this show before. We know how it's going to end. And then we can give advice and guidance. Even if you don't know this specific one, the patterns, the general industry forces, and what's going to happen. And you can help out in ways that the newer people, I know this stuff. I live and breathe. And I'm just using cryptocurrency as an example, but they think they know the technology. And you haven't done this before, and you're not the expert, and you're not young like me, but we've seen things that they haven't. And we bring that expertise to bear. Now, it can be hard to convince them of that early on, but if you can show them, if you give them examples, that's going to build your credibility.
Yeah. When I was a much younger engineer, I remember I had learned how to use Excel and spreadsheets. And so I was very proud of that. And I had a boss that kind of looked at me and said, Lynn, you can make bigger mistakes faster than I could. But he says, you still are going to make mistakes.
That's very true. I see the software engineers who they're using new technologies that I'm not totally up to date. I know it at a high level. I certainly haven't coded with them, but I see them making mistakes. Nope. I know exactly what you're going to do. I know how this works. I don't know if it's because you put the semicolon here or there. You know that better than I do. But I do know that the way you're accessing the database, that's not efficient. Here's what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that kind of interests me, I know the class you teach, the book is geared towards the younger career people, although it applies to everybody, I think, moving forward. But in this case, our audience, I think they sometimes underestimate how long the career may be now. If they're in their 60s, they could have still a 20-year career in front of them. Any thoughts on how do you plan a career, even maybe if you're in your second act, as it were?
Absolutely. And let me note two things before I address that directly. The number one comment, and you can see this in the Amazon reviews, is I wish I had this book 20 years ago. But they really appreciate it today because sure, it's great to know how to network, how to lead at 25. But if you're 55, would you like to be better at networking? You can be better today. Don't wait another 10 or 20 years to get better at. Now, let me give you a basic example. Here's how I really motivate younger folks. Okay, imagine you are 25 years old and you have a job offer for $60,000. Instead of taking the job as it is, you've learned to negotiate. You've read my book, maybe another book on it, however you've done it, you've learned to negotiate. You're not the world's best negotiator, but you're a little better than before you read the book or took the class. So taking 60, you negotiate and get 61,000, just $1,000 more. That might be a 5-10 minute negotiation or a few emails back and forth. Okay, we can all imagine 61,000. If you do nothing else, if you stay in that job for the next 40 years, 1 hour of reading my chapter on negotiation, 10 minutes of negotiating with your future boss just got you $1,000 more for the next 40 years. You just earned $40,000. Wait a second. Hey, that's good money. And of course, you're thinking, wait, but I'm not going to be in that job for 40 years. You're going to have other jobs, promotions, raises. They're going to be for more than $1,000. If you learn to negotiate at 25, you can add tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars to your lifetime earnings. Now, wait, I'm not 25, I'm 55. Okay, if you learn to negotiate, even if you get just $1,000 more, and it's for the next 10 years, well, you just got $10,000. Isn't that worth a few hours of reading of a book? Of course, you're probably not just going $1,000 more.
Right.
And we're just talking compensation. Negotiation is actually used in a whole host of places, internally and externally, that will help you. And now the big secret is I use negotiations because we can do the math, like how much per year by this many years. But the same thing is true for your leadership, for your communication, for your networking. No one says you're a better leader, so here's $1,000 more. But if you are a better leader, you will stand out. You will get the promotion. You will get put on the key project. You will accelerate your career. It's nicer if you're accelerating at the start of a 50-year career, but even if you're accelerating in the last 10 years, you are accelerating. You are going further. And that's generally what we want. So at any point in your career, it's worth developing these skills and it's worth having that plan. So if we think about the career plan, if you're on some project, you've got some 2-year project and you've been doing it by the seat of your pants, you haven't had a plan, so it's been chaotic and bumpy. And now you've got maybe about 4 months left in this 2-year plan. You say, we haven't had a plan this far, so let's not bother. You say, well, you know what? Plans are good. I wish we had before. Let's plan out those final 4 months to remove the bumps, to be as efficient as possible. So the same thing applies. Whatever time you have, these tools, the career planning, the skill building, will still help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the negotiating is especially timely because, again, the people I'm speaking to are experts in their fields, but they're not used to negotiating their expertise. Again, what they can apply could make millions for some company, but they're not used to saying, I could get 2% of that or something. They're used to saying maybe it's worth $1,000 when in fact it's $50,000 of value that the company is going to receive for that. So I think, again, this whole idea of getting into the idea of negotiating, especially if you've been in the corporate world where at least you probably haven't had much experience, it becomes critical to your success.
Absolutely. And with other skills like communicating, when you are the director of whatever and you're brought into this group meeting, they listen to you because, oh, yeah, you're the director of this group. But when you are a consultant and you're trying to say to someone who's just meeting you for the first time, here's what I know and here's why it is helpful to you, especially if it's something they hadn't thought of before, they're not going to inherently listen to you. You don't get that meeting that you put on their calendar and they show up because that's what you do. You have to communicate it in a way that sells it. And having important, useful, timely communication skills matter much more for this potential client than it did for this colleague who, if he didn't quite get it, he might say, good enough. Someone else gets it. Yeah, I'm fine. I'll rubber stamp it. Yeah. So the communication becomes much more important. Our networks become much more important because we're on our own. We have to use our network. All of these skills, really, the amplification of them is much bigger when it's just us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, another thought I always have with working with people is that as you leave the corporate world and go out on your own, you have to develop new habits of thinking as well as habits of action. And I think myself and others, we underestimate how we're creatures of habit, and the corporate habits, which were all good and useful and made us successful, we may have to shift those. And often I think as people first retire, there's some studies I've read where there's 1.5 years of confusion while people get their feet on the ground again saying, oh, I can do anything today, but what am I going to do? And so you really have to be more intentional about saying, hey, I need some new habits here as I start off on a new career.
During the Great Recession, I was teaching at the SUNY Levin Institute, SUNY, the State University of New York. The Levin Institute was a special program, and we had adult students, basically. We had a few programs sponsored by the New York Economic Development Council. During the Great Recession, of course, lots of layoffs, and certainly some of the older workers were having trouble. They'd be in a corporate job for many years or had a few corporate jobs. Those jobs disappeared. They weren't coming back. And the newer jobs were at startups, were at smaller businesses. I don't just mean high tech, but at smaller companies. So we wanted to transition them in, and New York funded this because they wanted to get people back to work and help them find a new career. The biggest challenge wasn't, we're going to teach you these new skills. People are capable of learning new skills. You can nowadays take classes online very easily. You can read things online in books. Getting that knowledge is easy. The harder part is that cultural change. It's going from, well, let's have a pre-meeting to plan the meeting before the meeting for the meeting, to at a startup of 6 people, you turn around your chair and say, hey, Bob, so I have an idea. What if we do this? I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. Done. That was the meeting. That was it. You just made a decision, and now you've got a new project for the next 3 months. And they're not used to that. Don't we have to run it by legal? We don't have a lawyer here. Even that's an example. When I have consulted for a couple Fortune 500 companies, now when we would do something, yes, run it by legal. And they'd be worried about something happening. So I consulted Sears was one of the companies I consulted to. Sears, I believe they said they get sued every single day. Now, that's not a reflection on Sears. It's a reflection on when you have that many stores, you have a slip and fall, you have a workman's comp, you'll have sexual harassment just because you have that many people.
Mhm.
Just every day at that size, you get a lawsuit a day. Okay, fine. And they have to be careful and they have to think, hey, if we do this, what happens to our brand if something goes wrong? And so I respect that they were careful in terms of their brand, in terms of being sued. We're a tiny startup. I'm not worried about being sued. I'm worried about, will we actually be able to make payroll next week? That's a much bigger worry. I don't even think about being sued. When I think about the brand, what if we say something stupid on Twitter and our brand is tarnished? I'll just change the brand because hardly anyone knows about us anyway. And so it's a whole different mindset. It's a different set of values. And so this is what you need to shift, to your point. You have to change. It's not just your knowledge and skill set. It's how you think about, how you approach things, how you work. And that's the hard part to change.
Yeah, that's it takes some intentional work, I think. And that is just, and again, like I said, it's just hard. And people often don't think about that until they realize they're being confused more than usual. Another thing I'd like you to address was, and we mentioned it earlier, but I'd like to go back to it a little bit, is this idea of, I've been playing with the idea that even if I'm 60 or even 70, it might be useful to have a 10-year plan, just to be thinking about, okay, because I could live another 20, even 30 years if I'm really fortunate. And so this idea that I'm only going to look 5 years in the future may actually be short-sighted on my part. And don't know if you, as you talked about career planning, you ever had some context like that? Or
Well, let's think of the following. Imagine the CEO comes to you and she says, this is a really important project. I'm putting you in charge. You've got to deliver this in the next 2 years. What do? You say, okay, great, I'm on it. And you go lock yourself in your office. I'll see you in 2 years, cross your fingers, hope we get there. And you show up in 2 years and say, well, here's how we did. Of course not. You say, all right, 2 years, this is important. What are we going to do? We're going to create a project plan. We're going to have a schedule. We're going to have a budget. We're going to think about what are the risk factors. Now, you absolutely know two things. First, you can't plan it in complete detail. You have no idea what you're doing on day 437. But that's okay. You've got a good sense, what are we doing the next month? What's getting all the stakeholders in? It's getting maybe the requirements. We know we'll be building at this phase, maybe integrating with partners at that point. So you've got the placeholders. It's fuzzier further out, clearer sooner. You also know that whatever you put on paper is not what's going to happen. You cannot accurately predict 2 years out. So what do? You say, we're going to have a check-in. We're going to check in, whether it's weekly, quarterly, whatever you do, check in, and we will adjust the plan if we need to because we're off track. Maybe the goals adjust. We've certainly all seen that. She comes in 3 months later, oh, wait, change your plans. Make sure you include this or don't do that. So we're going to adjust our plan as we go. Now, we know you are not guaranteed to succeed even if you do all that. We also know if you don't do any of that, you're pretty much guaranteed failure. Now, if this is what we have to do for a 2-year project at work, think about a bigger, more critical project known as your career. It's not 2 years, it's 10 or 20 or 30. And this is not just a critical project, it is the project. This is a big part of your life. This is, are you financing retirement or the second home or someone's college? This is the key thing for you. So we're going to use every tool we have, including our project planning skills. And the same techniques that we would use on our projects at work, we can use for our careers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that perspective. Because again, I think that's an important thing that often when we think about retirement or traditional, it wasn't very long. But now all of a sudden, for most of it, it's getting to be a longer period of time. So the planning becomes a lot more important. Before we finish, I want you to also share, I know you've done some work around apps and different things. And so I'd like to hear what you've been doing around that.
I created 2 apps. Now, the first is the companion app to the book. What happens when you read a book like mine? You say, oh, there's great advice in here. I hope you say that. But then you forget 2 weeks later. We all do this, and I hate that. I take notes on my books. I still don't remember it. I still never go back and look. So I created first a free app, the Career Toolkit app, available on the Android and iPhone stores. And it has all the key ideas in the book. And it's accessible one of 2 ways. One is you can pull them up and search or sort or go by topic. So if, for example, you are walking into a networking event 3 months from now, and you forgot what's in the book, because we all do, 5 minutes before you walk in the room, pull up that app, go to the networking tips, flip through them, get that refresher. Go, oh, yeah, you got to remember to do this. Great. But then there are other skills that aren't necessarily just in time. Improving your ability to communicate, for example. You don't say, wait, hold on before we talk. Let me just pull up my app. You want to keep those ideas top of mind. So the app is designed, you only need to open it once every 30 days, and it will pop up at a time you set one of the tips. So maybe at 9 a.m. as you get to work each day, get a little pop-up, go, good idea, swipe it away, 2 seconds a day, but it helps keep it top of mind. Mm-hmm. So that's the Career Toolkit app. We then took that idea and said, if this works for my book, I'll bet it can work for other content. So we created the Brain Bump app. Brain Bump, it's 2 words on the Android store. Apple combined it, so it's 1 word, no space. The Brain Bump app is the same idea, but has not only my book, but other books, blogs, podcasts, and classes, and has content from them, the key ideas that, again, you can either look up to get just in time, or you get that daily push at a time you set. We never send you notifications you didn't ask for, and it just helps keep it top of mind. Right now, when we're recording this, right at the end of July 2022, we are still in beta. We only have a handful of content. I've got a lot of content that's getting on the app in August. And like a streaming service, we'll just keep adding more and more over time. There's also still a few bugs we're working out. The big launch will be in September. So if you download before September 2022, know that there will be a few bumps. But this has great content to help you learn and retain new skills.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. That sounds fascinating, because having a reminder or something like that to bring it back into awareness is always I've read a lot of books and unfortunately, or been to a lot of classes, but getting awareness back on what the subject was is always a challenge, and sounds like a great opportunity here. So that's great. So to kind of wrap up here, we're going to include your contact information. Any other special things that you would like to have people contact you about or see on your websites?
I'll point out a few things, and I'm going to give you the URLs, but of course they'll be in the show notes. So the 2 websites, the careertoolkitbook.com. That's the website for the book. Obviously, you can see where to buy it, Amazon, elsewhere. You can follow me on social media or get in touch with me. I put out new content each week. I write new articles. You can also go to the app page, and that will take you to the stores where you can download the Career Toolkit app. And then there's a resources page that has a bunch of free downloads. It also has links to free online resources and then other books I recommend. Those unfortunately aren't free. They like to charge for those. But everything but the books, it's all free. I don't even ask for your email. I'd rather you take it than I try to get it to market you or do other things. So the Career Toolkit book has all sorts of free resources for you. My other website, Cognosco Media, COGNOSCO media.com. Now there you can learn about the Brain Bump app, and we also link to the Apple and Android stores there to download the Brain Bump app that we talked about. There's also, you mentioned some people might be thinking of writing a book. There is an author resources page. I mentioned I read those 1,500 articles. There's about 200 or so that were really useful, and I've got them all organized by topic. So any aspiring authors, feel free to go there at cognoscomedia.com.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And I really appreciate your sharing all your interesting ideas, wisdom, and knowledge. So it's been a great pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
Again, many thanks to Mark on sharing his journey and the exciting work that he's doing. There'll be links in the show notes to his Career Toolkit website, as well as to the Brain Bump app, which he's just rolling out right now in September, and also his profile on LinkedIn. So I encourage you to check out his work in all those areas. Remember, with an Encore career, the rewards are great. You can work when you want, where you want, and you can do the work you love. To get a powerful start, please contact me. You have the time, attention, and money to make this leap, so let me help you do it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.